Hello, Endeavor here. So I'm back visiting my buddy Morgoth. Him and I, we do our classic movie streams every month, but every couple of years I manage to stop over and give him a visit IRL. So I'm here with him right now. How you doing, Morgoth?
I'm doing well. I've got a little bit of a cold, and so I may sound a little bit stuffy or I may cough. But yeah, we're sitting down together with one microphone, so it may sound a little bit funny. But yeah, this is like the third time, isn't it? We've met up in real world.
Right, yeah, this is the third time that I've come to visit you, and this time I'm helping you out in the garden and seeing where you record all your videos and stuff, and it's been a lot of fun. But I guess what we're going to talk about was because the first time we met, we talked about the what was going on in 2019, and then last time was I think it was beginning of 2023, so that was about 2.5 years ago. I think we'll just talk about everything which has gone on since then. And if I had to sum it up, I feel like 2020, 2021, that was kind of peak clown world. That was peak woke. That was height of COVID. And that was just as the Biden administration had gotten in America. And, I feel like it kind of has petered out since then. So, like, even towards the end of the Biden administration, a lot of this really started to lose a lot of, I guess what we would call woke, really kind of started to lose a lot of the momentum behind it. Now, I'm not someone who would go so far as to say that it's been put away, but you can say that the second Trump administration has kind of dialed that back a lot. So it kind of feels like that. It kind of feels like the peak clown world madness was early. It was late 2010s, early 2020s, and we're kind of a bit past that. But the other thing that's happened in more recent months is because it feels like that kind of, in some ways, discredited the left. But what you see with the new Trump administration, and you see with the Tory party failing in Britain and the Canadian Conservative Party failing, it's almost like the right is being discredited at the same time. So we're kind of in this now this new phase where the peak craziness has kind of gone away, but there's no real direction of where things are going from here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel like we don't really have a kind of larger narrative or direction. So it used to be one where we did have it and it was sort of toxic and insane. And now I think it's more like kind of that we don't have one at all. And whether we're people were speculating about when Trump would come in and there would be like this sort of go back to the 90s aesthetic and vibe where we're gonna kind of try and be sort of as if it was like the Lethal Weapon or something, so some kind of 80s or 90s buddy movie where the race stuff was put away and all of that. That's how I think. Like maybe they wanted to do it. I don't think that's happened. It's more like there just isn't a kind of guiding narrative or a wider cultural ideology to give people. And that would be in America. And obviously, I'm not in America, but just an impression I've got. But I can say that in the United Kingdom, that's absolutely the case. Where I don't think the Labour government has any direction whatsoever, and I don't think what we've seen here is the rise of the UK aesthetic, which I've done a video on before, which is it is very interesting to talk about, where it's this sort of squalid, depressing, sort of alienating non-place, as if it's like this afterbirth of globalism, and it's globalism collapsing in on itself. I mean, even globalism was a sort of meta narrative to live by, but now it's just as if there's nothing. There's nothing, and they don't know how to frame it. And even the news stories when they come out, because they're not within a larger story, I think they land harder. There's no trampoline there's no kind of framing device or narrative technique where you can put it into a wider thing. And so what tends to happen is that it's just like you're landing without the safety net. There's just this large thud. I mean, a perfect example is what we've been talking about with the Epstein kind of thing with Trump. And you see that MAGA just lands on the ground with a huge kind of crunch. And you see, for example, with the Labour government, and the some stuff like the grooming gangs discourse, which has come back, or last year you had the Southport thing, and it's as if like that the government has no way to dress up these really kind of horrible things anymore. You just kind of have to deal with it. You just kind of have to take it on the chin. So I feel like it's a quite a harsh time. It's quite a sort of sobering, realist, and sort of brutal time.
Yeah, so one thing I noticed in Canada when I visited some of my family members in Southern Ontario and Toronto, my hometown this year, was that it doesn't feel like woke has been put away per se. It's just that it's now stale. So with Canada, I mean, it's debatable, but you could argue that it went all in on globo homo, unlike any other country. Maybe Britain would be a comparable one, but we had 10 years of Justin Trudeau, and he's basically just textbook woke. If you looked up woke in like this era of politics of the 2010s and early 2020s in a dictionary, you'd see a picture of Justin Trudeau. He really kind of embodies that, but he became terribly unpopular during COVID, but then also just the broader cultural message of the Trudeau government and of this kind of era in Canada. So the narrative in Canada for that time was that Canada's a nation of immigrants, it's multicultural, it's a post national country, and that it was built on racist settler colonialism. And that our goal is is to basically undo Canada's European heritage and institute this multicultural post-national open country for well the new like post-national world. But that's really run out of steam. So Trudeau became extremely unpopular, although his party was able to hold on to power. But that required them to shift that messaging. So when with someone like Mark Carney when he got in, he actually kind of had to play to a certain civic nationalism, a kind of a liberal civic national Canadian civic nationalism from the 1990s and 2000s. The idea is that, well, you can be proud of Canada, but only insofar as it's more liberal than the United States. And well, and then it would just be various material things like drinking Tim Hortons coffee rather than Starbucks. In the Canadian scene, we call this leaf lib nationalism. They've tried to kind of reinstate that a little. So like Carney's not coming out and saying that like Canada is built on racist settler colonialism now. A lot of this has to do with the clash between Canada and the United States over Donald Trump's trade policies. But I find like this kind of narrative, it's only appealing to boomers who were already in adulthood by that time. But then you look at a city like Toronto, which is like I don't know, it's less than 40% white at this point. That's not going to appeal to any of them. So like all of the woke stuff is still there. You see the rainbow flags hanging everywhere, those ones with the triangles, which are even more woke, I guess. You see the radio is just 24/7 libtardism. But it feels like it's kind of lost its luster and that they have no way to go. But in a city like that, what else would they have other than woke? So the issue is the major issues in Canada, those being immigration, housing prices, price of food. It's in the public consciousness now. There's this widespread sense that the country has gotten significantly worse. But the government doesn't really have a narrative. It's either just like the holdover from the Justin Trudeau era for the big cities, and then for the boomers in smaller towns, it's kind of throwback to the 1990s and 2000s, in the same sense that Trump is kind of trying to do an American version of that. But I just don't think any of that's landing. And now, like, just the reality of the country is being exposed in a very new way. And you see the same kind of thing in the UK as well.
Yeah, well, it's the same. It's the same with the Labour government because I think that the idea was that they'd run the Blair playbook and they'd outflank parties, especially the Tories on the right. I mean, there's a lot of fakery on the right. Like, I've just got no time at all for Nigel Farage or Reform. There's some more interesting things going on with Rupert Lowe and this kind of stuff. But I think the problem is that they firstly they can't actually move so far right as to actually sort of make people happy who are more centrist because the country's just in such a bad state. And at the same time, I think the idea that they could sort of alienate people on their left is not true either, because actually they can go off and the kind of the hard left who are now completely alienated with the Starmer government, who's alienated pretty much every section in society, but in particular the left, they've been alienated by these cuts to benefits and heating allowances and things. And then they've also been alienated over the situation with Israel and Palestine and what's going on there. And in actual fact, they do have other options. I mean, there's now talk of a new kind of Corbyn party, which the whole point of Starmer was to kill that off and return Labour to the centre. And so you find that more and more it's that cliche of the centre not being able to hold. And so you find say Starmer then gets into a tizzy because one week he'll come out and make a kind of Enoch Powell's type speech about immigration, but then he has to walk that back because he gets a rebellion on his left flank. And then you had a few weeks ago with Glastonbury, where they've turned this Palestinian action, they've made them into a terror group. So you see all of these dirty tricks, which have been used on the right wing forever, can be easily switched around onto the left, and that's what's happening there. So then they're alienating that section as well, who are now going off and looking at other options. And so you find that you're going to end up with like a sort of zero seats Labour government. And there's no sort of political formula to get them out of this mess. One of the things that was happening just last week was where Chancellor Rachel Reeves like burst out in tears in Parliament. And I do actually think that was an interesting moment because they'd been basically Britain's bankrupt, and they were trying to make all these cuts to get balance the books. Ridiculous because all these like say inheritance taxes on farmers, winter fuel allowance, and all of this kind of thing. That's kind of pennies compared to the like 22 billion on carbon capture bullshit and all of this. You just think what is going on? But even like just sort of leaving that aside for a second, they couldn't even get these cuts through because they're left wing. Basically, they were acting harsher than Tories on monetary policy, and the left spat a dummy out, and it was creating a crisis. So then you get this situation where I imagined that Rachel Reeves has had private kind of meetings with the big boys, the central bankers and the money power, and they've been like saying, you've got 18 months to sort this out, or we're going to start and pull the levers, which will make your like it'll sink this government, it'll sink your job, and it'll sink the pound. You need to make the cuts necessary to get on to balance the interest payments and all, whatever it happens to be. And they realise that their own political base prevented them from doing that. And it's almost as if you can imagine Rachel Reeves like sort of burst out in tears and crying, whilst Keir Starmer's like sort of he made an arse of that as well. That little thing that went on by not really he didn't really lay out that he wouldn't fire her. But what I as an interesting little moment what I liked was that it was as if she knew that the economy is going to tank and it's the left wingers who are going to do it. And it's this sort of grand tragedy or something like that. You've done it to yourselves now. This is it. The big boys, the central bankers are going to torpedo the economy. And it wasn't me, it was you. Like the Radiohead song, you did it, you do it to yourselves, you do. And that's what really hurts. But I mean, they still come up with money to piss away on all kinds of other nonsense. So it's hard to, when you know that's going on, it's hard to see the tragedy of it, really.
Yeah, so I mean, you see that the left is just in a horrible state, both in Britain, Canada, in America in particular. That they seem to have been cleared out in the past election. They lost the election quite decisively, the 2024. It's kind of clear why. I mean, the Biden administration seemed like it was just an absolute disaster. But there was talk at the time that, well, this was going to be like I think we mentioned earlier, like a return to the 90s. So it's going to be back to the kind of individualism and kind of civic nationalism, the stuff you'd see in American pop culture in the 1980s and 1990s. But I mean, what I said at the end of last year was that that was just going to be dead on arrival because you can't bring it back a past era at all, but you can't even bring back something resembling it without the reality of the society that that was created on. Because even though the 1980s, 1990s, it was kind of this civic nationalism, kind of this liberalism. You have to remember that countries like the United States, they were still like 75% white or so. Canada was like 90% white, and I would imagine Britain would have been even more so. And what you see with the second Trump administration, I think if it proves nothing else, it's that you can't actually fix the fundamental problems of a society with a bunch of political slogans. So no matter how much Trump talks about making America great again and a new golden age, it's just not going to happen because the reality isn't there. And now it honestly seems like the right, at least in terms of the mainstream right, that being like the GOP or the Tory parties in any of these countries, it seems like they're in a just as bad of a state as the left now. So I mean, with Trump, they have just this catastrophe. They have this catastrophe on their hands at the moment with the Epstein files. This is like the current thing right now, but it's not even really a current thing because this is something which has been going on for the last 7 or 8 years. It's decades long saga, but Epstein allegedly having killed himself, which no one believes, that happened back in 2019. That's before COVID. So like in terms of news cycles, you like news cycles typically, current things, they only last 2 weeks. But this is one that's just years on end. And I think one of the major mistakes that Trump made was that the MAGA brand, so much of that was so invested in conspiracy theories. It was so invested in the idea that there's a deep state and that it's run by bad actors and it's run by people who have allegedly, although we're pretty sure that they have, carried out horrific acts involving minors. And that Trump is the savior. He's going to drain the swamp. He's going to clear them out. He's going to put all these people on trial. And so much of the Trump base is invested in that. They're invested in all these conspiracy theories. Like think about something like QAnon. QAnon doesn't really exist anymore, but in some ways it kind of went mainstream. In that, in that this basically just became the MAGA movement as a whole. But now he's in this situation where he's not releasing the Epstein files because, as it appears, it will either implicate him or a bunch of people within his administration or his allies. And MAGA is like a cult of personality, but this might actually be a breaking of the dam moment for the MAGA movement.
Yeah, but it's like what I was saying earlier, where there's no overarching sort of narrative, and this is here again. You see where it's kind of like the end of the political kayfabe. It's like you're reaching the point where the fakery of it all. It doesn't really have a story to tell anymore. It's as if they just want to go home. It's as if, I mean, I think like people get a bit carried away with all the wrestling analogies, but it is a little bit like Hulk Hogan's turning to the crowd and just shrugging his shoulders and saying, "Yeah, that's it. That's it is what it is. Like it is all fake." And I think this is why it lands so hard, and I think it's hitting all different sort of sides of the political spectrum, and you see the two converging. I mean, we were having a discussion last night about how the left is splintered, and it's as if the tanky Marxist left of old is coming back with a vengeance against this sort of global homo liberal left. There's a similar sort of situation over on the right as well, where you see these kind of more Zionist friendly sort of establishment pundits are under attack from where you could call it the dissident right, but it actually seems to be much bigger than that. It's not. It's just seems so much bigger than what it's ever been before. Sort of attacking this idea that they put Israel first, and this is where it all goes back into Epstein, and so it's as if it's this like mass red pilling moment. I mean, I'd kind of given up on the idea that of like red pilling the normies and things, and I tended to sort of think that the people who are speaking about elite theory had something, because you could kind of bypass a lot of the bullshit. If you could just get your people into positions of influence and power, they could do a lot of good. And so, despite that, I now find we're in sort of midway through 2025, and it actually is like the great masses are just seeing the world as it is without any kind of comfort blanket. To just hit the ground hard and wake up. And there's nothing that does that more, in my opinion, than the whole Epstein sort of saga. Well, I mean, this is the thing. Like you had Tucker Carlson making a big speech about this, which we listened to earlier.
Which was at TP USA. This is like a
Yes,
massive mainstream conservatism conference.
and And what you find then because of that is that he's like this snowplow. He's clearing away, and it's as if, well, now people can say, "Well, if Tucker Carlson's talking about that, it's safe for me to talk about it as well." So you just get all of the people going in behind him, and it's. I think it's terrible for Trump. Trump, there's memes going around now, which you didn't used to see, where it was like Trump is just this kind of puppet of Netanyahu, or variations on this theme. And I don't think he knows how to get himself out of this. I think Trump thinks he can just sort of bluster and bullshit his way. But again, you hit sometimes you just hit hard rock, and the whole premise Trump can get away with a lot, but he can't get away with everything. And one of the things I think which is a political death for Trump is starting new forever wars. There was a huge backlash against that. People will turn the blind eye if deporting illegal immigrants gets held up in the courts, that kind of thing. They think, okay, fair enough, it's Democrat judges or whatever. But then the other one is this kind of thing of the elite paedophile networks which they want Trump to clear out. And for him to just flatly refuse to do that, once again, you get back to this kind of hitting the ground hard on uncomfortable realities. And I don't know what comes after all this. I don't know where all of this goes. We just got a bit of thunder in the background to add a special effect to the ominous kind of forecasts that I'm
Yeah,
coming
well, it's
out
like
with.
we don't know where it's going.
When the thunder came, but anyway,
Yeah, I mean, because that links up with the other thing, which is big on the left and on the right now, and that the discussion of Zionism is basically out in the mainstream.
yeah,
So what was in 2016, 2017, these were neo-Nazi Pepe the Frog meme on these obscure internet forums by these right-wing incels. But today, this is right out there in the mainstream. So the things that you and I we used to we're still kind of used to saying the who's and them, which but the issue of Jewish influence is kind of just out in the open, both on the right and on the left. There was this fascinating video from yesterday or a couple days ago of this guy, and we both watched this video of what was it called? Bad empanadas, and
yeah,
it's some like libtard in Australia, and he had this he released this video criticizing Contra Points, the transgender, because he wasn't because he came out in defense of the state of Israel and saying that the left is going too far with their anti-Zionism. And well, this guy came out with a video saying that like, well, Zionism entirely is a racist, settler,
Nazi.
colonialist. He called it a Nazi ideology, which I know that this guy is no friend of ours. I mean, I know he would say this exact same thing about Canada, saying that it's a racist, settler, colonialist country. But it's interesting that the Zionist lobby and the organized Jewish community, they've lost the left and they're quickly losing the right as well. So they're in this state right now where the only people they really have control over anymore are just these 75-year-old boomer Republicans from Iowa or something like that. And well, but once they kick the bucket, well, I think it's just over for the Zionist lobby because, like I mentioned at TPUSA, Tucker Carlson not only was he calling out Jeffrey Epstein, he said that Jeffrey Epstein was working for Mossad. He was an agent of Israel. And this is a political activism conference for young conservatives in the United States where Zionist power is located. And I mean, they've already lost the left, and that ship has sailed. And now, and you even look at these polls that they have young Republicans. The majority of young Republicans support an arms embargo against Israel. So they're just losing. They're just losing across the board. I mean, what I think you're going to end up with is kind of the political dichotomy of the post-war era, the one that's centered around World War II and alleged war crimes which took place during World War II. Well, you're going to see. I think you're kind of seeing that coming to an
Yeah,
end. Whereas you're going to see, like on the left, this more like third worldism.
yeah. What we're seeing across this is the thing. Like I think one of the things I've been coming back to is like there's no real story, and it could be that in a kind of grander sense. The where we are as like now is where the World War II mythology is just finally dying, and you see that with on the right with the Tucker Carlson stuff, with the kind of just overt way people are talking about. sort of Epstein and Zionist influence. But then when you go over, this is why I found that sort of clip we watched. What had happened was that the famous transsexual Contra Points had been under siege from his own base about how you like what the situation in Palestine. So ContraPoints finally sort of responded with a kind of blog length Twitter post, I presume, taking a very centrist line on it. But what was there implicit in that was that the left are going so far with the anti-Zionism that it's becoming anti-Semitism. And there was, so in a weird way, when the pressure was on, it was like the ContraPoints as this kind of woke transsexual, global homo advocate, all of a sudden became like sort of defending the center ground of the American regime. Well, I mean, that was always the case. It was always the case that this was the foreign policy of America, the rainbow flags everywhere. But here you had it explicitly that the transsexual is defending the center ground. And it makes sense because that was what America was exporting. But on a larger sort of scale, it's as if ContraPoints is trying to explain to the left in the end, you will lose because what you're really undermining here or is like the boomer truth regime, the post-war consensus, which holds in check the far right. That's but this sort of bad empanada or whatever, he didn't seem to understand that. And some of the things he came out with were really quite surprising. Like he was saying, for example, why should Jewish people in America be bothered about Israel at all? If that is their identity, then they are identifying with a Nazi regime in the Middle East. And that's like obviously that's not wrong. We wouldn't be so. And what that amounts to essentially is that their identity in America has to be dissolved, and they should just become individualistic consumers like everybody else. That was basically the case that he made there, which and on a YouTube channel with hundreds of thousands of people. So that's where they are now. And it's as if you've got this splintering because, of course, one of the things you notice about that Bard Empanada is that he was going back and talking about the Nazis, the Germans, blah, 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 over and over and over again. That was why he was saying Israel is evil because it's Nazi. Whereas, so you've kind of got this a splintering and almost as if the post-war mythology is eating itself alive. It's like, and it can't go on the left. It's dissolving, but it's also dissolving on the right as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wrote an article just after the whole Israel Palestine thing kicked off in October 2023. I titled the article "Dr. Goldenstein's Monster," and what I posited is that this third worldist left is kind of like a Frankenstein monster for for Jewish power in the West, because I'm sure I don't need to inform any of my audience what kind of movements they've been behind in the West since the end of the Second World War, and that the fact that there isn't a large non-white population in Western countries, the fact that they have this animosity towards white people, the fact that they think that their entire identity is basically like being victims. A lot of this is in large part due to Jewish influence in politics and education and media. And the problem they have now is that that's being applied to them. So that those same narratives of, let's say, America, Canada, whatever, being these racist, settler, colonialist societies built off of the genocide of indigenous people, the kind of libtard stuff you're used to hearing. Now that's being applied to Israel, and in some way, the irony is that their own community played a large part in creating all the conditions for that coalition to exist at all. Now, what I kind of see it as is because I don't want to give people the wrong idea, because I certainly do not think that these third worldists are in any way, shape, or form friends of mine. But it kind of, the way I put it is, it's almost like a schism, like the schism between the Catholic Church and Protestantism in the 16th century. They're both the same religion, but a different interpretation of that religion. Because you see with this Bad Empanadas video, he's still talking about Nazis, he's still talking about racism, he's still talking about colonialism, but he's applying that to Israel. So it's almost as if it's almost as if the boomer truth regime, the thing that ContraPoints is trying to hold up, the thing that these older Democrats and older Republicans all believe in. It's almost as if this is the Catholicism where it's universalist egalitarianism and globalism for the entire world. But because of World War II, the Jews get an exception in the state of Israel. Whereas this bad empanadas guy is arguing
They don't.
that they don't get an exception. It's universalist egalitarian globalism for everyone, including Israel.
Well, yeah, and so the problem there is that the Contra Points is trying to defend the situation where they do get an exception because he understands that this is the foundation of the whole of the post-war mythology, which is undergirding the West. That what we call the Burma Truth regime is contingent on them having an exception. Yet these tanky third worldist types are saying no, no, they shouldn't actually, and they're using the logic of the post-war
Right, exactly.
to do it. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to see. And so the status quo has to be we have to hold on to this kind of fraying sort of ethical system that we have. And the true victors, I think that somebody who's in the center, like ContraPoints, understands the real victors of that will be the forces of the right ultimately, because then it'll be a straightforward us versus them without the kind of the sins or alleged sins of regimes long past hanging around our necks.
One joke I made yesterday was that there was a clip called "Anti-Racist Hitler," which Tim Murdoch made back in I think like 2011 or something like that. It's a great clip if you haven't seen it. But basically, the idea is that the Führer becomes the president of Israel or something, and then he starts advocating diversity and multiculturalism and calling everybody who is against it a racist. And then it ends up with the Israelis being replaced by the third world hordes. What's interesting is that in a way, this bad empanadas is actually like
Yeah,
genuinely he's genuinely taking that position.
he is anti-racist Hitler. Like he is anti-racist Hitler coming for Israel and the Jewish people and telling them to dissolve their identity and to open the ways up to the rest of the world. And to believe that everybody can live peacefully and happily and nobody should have any religious or ethnic allegiances to anything. We should all live in this kind of Marxian sort of mode where we're just widgets in a machine and we've all got the same stuff, and that's how you find happiness. And I find that totally unhinged. But yeah, it's you can see why they're worried about this. You can see why they want to shut it down.
I don't think I need to say this, but if that actually happened, if Israel actually weren't a Jewish ethno state, but one of these multicultural for everybody, well, I mean, you can imagine what you can imagine what would happen in that state. And well, let's just say they wouldn't be holding hands, singing "Kumbaya" and going to pride parades together. It wouldn't turn out well for them. I also think that people like this bad empanadas guy. I don't know whether he was white or not. He kind of looked a bit swarthy. He might have been Turkish or something. I have no idea. But the other example was that what was that British twit from a few days ago? The woman who was standing in the field saying, "I can't wait for the end
Yeah,
of that." That's the thing. What did you say? I can't wait for the end of the
I can't
West.
wait for the end of the West. I can't wait for the fall of the West or something like that. So she is this new. I would say this is the post woke left, and I made the joke that like you say, ContraPoints is now like a paleo woke. It's it's
Paleo
it
woke.
could be, but the paleo woke have now been born. It's ossified and stuck in 2017 forever. And yeah, I think that the new left, the new virulent sort of post woke left, is third worldist, and that's everybody as retarded as it ever was, but at least they're getting their energy back, they're getting their mojo back. And this sort of pretty kind of English girl walking along the Thames was going on about this group that's been banned in a viral video that it was. And
This
then at
was
the
the
end was,
Palestine Action
yeah,
Group.
Palestine Action got banned by the government. And then as a terrorist group, and then she was like complaining about that and explaining what had happened in the case. And then at the end, she signed off on I presume it was TikTok or something, with yeah, as always, I can't wait for the West to fall. And I did like a sort of response where I was like, well, the world isn't going to be kind to a woman like you if they were in this sort of state of nature. Um, which is true.
I mean, my take on that is that I still kind of, I mean, it's disputable whether or not you want to consider someone like her or someone like this bad empanadas people to be a guy to be woke. Like, I mean, I guess from my end, you don't want to split hairs over definitions, but I mean, when I hear like words like post colonialism or settler colonialism and racism, I associate that with woke. But I guess there's a disconnect from the American State Department narrative, which was pushed for in the 2010s and the 2020s. And that in that sense, it is actually distinct. But what I think would happen is if that actually came into fruition, is that these kind of tanky types, these like college students, people like this bad empanadas or this British girl in the field saying she can't wait for the West to fall. I mean, they just wouldn't exist in a couple of decades. They just won't reproduce. Might maybe some of them will get some sense into them, or they just get wiped out. And then what you'd end up with is just these third world groups who have been imported into the West, just shamelessly advocating their own group interest at the expense of the white majority. Now, one thing I was wondering is when I mentioned earlier that it doesn't seem like woke has been put away in Toronto. Or I'm sure it's the same in cities like London. You still see all the posters everywhere, but it feels stale and feels like you're just going through the motions. And one of the reasons is like they can't go back to a civic nationalism because people who identify with the nation are white. So with these groups who have been imported, what I think would replace woke would be that just them shamelessly advocating for their own interests. And you already see that. So, for example, in a city like Toronto, you see there are all of these standoffs in the street, these combating rallies between Jews and Arabs, Armenians and Turks, Sikhs and Hindus, or Pakistanis and Hindus, and it's just like every conflict going on around the world has now been imported, and you just see all these groups carrying their own ethnic conflicts over into Canadian society where they've all been imported. And I mean, I've mentioned on my channel many times of just these flagrant examples of these non-white politicians basically just flagrantly pursuing their own ethnic interests. You see that with people like Jagmeet Singh, who was the leader of this leftist party in Canada and supporting open borders and liberalism and globalism for Canada, but he was this radical Sikh nationalist and separatist back in India to the extent that he was even supporting like groups that India considered to be terrorist organizations. I think that's what you'll see coming. That's what's going to replace woke. I think that's the end point of the left is just ethnic interests for these various groups.
Yeah, it probably will, but it's not going to be egalitarian. I mean, to go back where you've got this kind of there seems to be an assumption on the third world, the white third worldists, that the only thing standing in the way of like egalitarian utopia is like Western capitalism. So if you just crush that, if you sweep that aside, then all of the bad things about the world will be finally sort of defeated, and then we will have egalitarianism forever. And I just don't see that as being the case whatsoever. I think the only difference is that the West, as they see it, is just sort of the biggest gorilla in the jungle, albeit it is getting on and long in the tooth. It's sure its age a little bit, but it's still like in this sense like what the bigger. But so if you do in the West, it doesn't mean that you're going to have egalitarianism. It just means that you're going to have lawlessness, and in particular, because she was in London, you'll just have this kind of Hobbesian state of nature until the next sort of tough guy or most organized group takes the reins of power. But there'll still be people in power and people out of power. There'll still be poor people being exploited by rich people. There's not, I mean, that's already going on in the world. Like if he, I don't know what kind of country she would actually be happy with. Presumably, what is India a good country for her, or is Russia? Well, no, Russia won't be because you'd be. Is China? I doubt it. Where now is the country on earth which is closest to what she would like to see? The fact is, it doesn't exist. because reality prevents it from existing. The actual human nature prevents it from existing. So it's as if like, yeah, we'll burn the West down for this sort of fantasy. I mean, you even have like sort of white nationalists coming
It's on the
out
right too. I was going to bring that up. That
and
yeah,
saying this idea that, well, okay, the West actually died like at Stalingrad or in 1945, and the sooner it comes down, the better. What does that mean, though? What does that look like? Who has power in that sense? Who will take power, and how does that work? What do we mean by bring down the West? Because I'm kind of famous for being a bit of a Luddite and a bit of a shireling, where I'm kind of happy to just sort of dial back Britain's place in the world so that we just kind of get our house in order, get the demographics in order, send the immigrants home, and just take a time out from world history for a while. We've been like sort of at the epicenter of world history for centuries and centuries. Like it would be nice, and we're on the we're heading to the end of our history fast here, and I would be like, yeah, let's take some time out and shut the borders, shut everything, and just calm down. So in that sense, in these kind of great power struggles, that would be my ideal. But I recognise that in reality, you'd have a vacuum of power, and something or someone would fill it. I would hope that that would be our guys, but there's a chance that it will not be, and things would get worse. And you're talking about these situations of just pure chaos, and in the at least in the sort of in the short term, that girl would actually be in for a hell of a time of it.
yeah. I mean, there was a meme that I had. That I was with the political compass, and then on each of the corners, I got all four of the quadrants: the top right, bottom right, top left, bottom left. It's the same like picture of this like obese, pimple-faced incel saying, "Well, I can't wait for societal collapse. Everyone's going to adopt my ideology." Then it's not as serious of a thing as the third worldist left, but there is this like third worldist right, which thinks that they seem to think, well, the West is Zog and it's LGBT, and that, well, once China, Iran, and Russia kick the West's ass in these wars, and then the American empire comes crumbling down. Well, then I think like they just seem to assume that that means that they're going to have based and red pilled National Socialism by default, where there's absolutely no there was none of that would suggest that would happen. Like let's say that China took over some country in the West. Well, are they now just going to like hand over political power to white nationalists because they spread some Chinese propaganda on social media? I doubt it. And but it's the same delusion as these third worldist leftists, at least the white ones, that where they think that, well, once the West comes crashing down, we're going to have Marxist, class free socialism where everyone's going to live in this workers' paradise. Well, that's obviously not going to happen either. Like you mentioned, that it's just going to be it's going to be a power struggle until the next big boy rises. I think that where this leaves the right is that, and I am actually quite optimistic on the direction the right is going. I mean, I think that the MAGA right and the mainstream right, it's an absolute disaster. But it is actually kind of opening the door for something much more genuine to come in, because if that's the reality of the society that's developing, and it's quickly appearing to be the case, the logical conclusion for the right is that we just have to take our own side. There are all these groups in our countries building up power. They've made it explicit that they hate us. They make it explicit that they just want to take like that what was it called, Glastonbury, what was the place called?
Glastonbury, yeah.
Glastonbury, yeah. It's this black guy on stage yelling, "You want your country back? That's not going to happen. Shut the fuck up!" And it was horrible music, but I mean, he's literally just saying to the indigenous British that we've taken your country, you're not getting it back, and that's tough for you. I mean, like this is not a guy who believes in holding hands and singing "Kumbaya." I mean, it's unbelievable that the crowd is mostly these like white Gen Xers. The idea that they could sit through that, but I think that the logical conclusion on the right is that you just have to take your own side, or else you're just going to be trampled. And a lot of the debates that we had in, say, 2017 or so, like between the liberal centrist classic liberalism and the what was then the alt right. Those are pretty much. I mean, it's clear who won that debate, and you know that you know who won because many of those who were on that kind of centrist, classic liberal, mainstream conservatism position have since acknowledged that yes, that the I mean they might not have acknowledged that they were wrong, but they've adopted the positions of what was called the alt right back then. And you can think of several figures. So someone like Carl Benjamin, I don't watch him so much anymore, but I think his messaging is a lot better now. Someone like Matt Walsh, who used to kind of be like just this conning shill. Well, but you know he's actually come out with some quite based things recently, and the idea of remigration that like this is something which again it was regulated to the far fringes of the online right in 2016 on places like 4chan. Well, that's something that's getting mainstream discussion on the right with mainstream influencers. So in some ways, there is actually a reason for optimism in that in the last 3 4 years, a lot of ideas which were originally called dissident right, which I mean that phrase we almost don't hear it anymore because it's not even that dissident anymore. It's not as on the fringes as it was back in 2017 2018.
The big losers are that kind of podcast scene of Douglas Murray. You remember when that bust up happened with the about once again you'll notice that there was this kind of confluence with sort of pro-Israel people like Douglas Murray, Constantine Kissen, but also then how it also correlated to somebody, Daryl Cooper, doing a podcast about
Right.
Winston Churchill, questioning whether or not Winston Churchill was such a hero and everything like that. And you'll see that it's exactly what we were discussing earlier about ContraPoints and about the tanky third worldists is just mirrored over on the right. And here you have once again, like our version of ContraPoints would be Douglas Murray.
He's gay
Um,
as well,
and he's
so
also gay. He's also like, and they are the ones who are calling like the woke right and all of this kind of thing. But you can see on both sides of it, what you've got are these gatekeeper figures and not being able to hold the line anymore, just exhausted with it all. And it always goes back to Zionist influence, and on the left, surprising enough, it's going just fully into the nature of Jewishness in America itself, and then how it correlates with the post World War II mythology. Now, here's the thing: I believe that this is what I kind of went on a little bit about the ContraPoints thing. And it's because I wanted to draw back to this thing that we've also seen with people like Douglas Murray and how it's just exactly the same thing. And in exactly the same thing way, you see that the centre is struggling against these new forces which are being sort of unleashed. And I think part of this is where I came in at the start and I said there's not really a coherent narrative. And you're going to get this kind of anti sort of centre. And I mean that in terms of the large liberal core of the post war era. That's now what we're seeing dying on both sides. And it isn't just that you've got a bunch of edgy lads on spreading memes on Twitter or doing spicy podcasts or anything. It's become a kind of formalized part of the zeitgeist. Is this breaking through finally the boomer truth regime? This is it's just falling apart left, right, and centre in its various guises. Whether it's somebody questioning sort of Winston Churchill, or whether it's somebody questioning Israel policy, or actually using the boomer truth sort of post-war mythology to make Zionists like hold them to their own standards and all of this kind of thing. And that is like the kind of the harshness of the era that we're in, I think.
what's interesting about you see with a lot of the controlled opposition on the right, I think one of the reasons it's falling so flat is that the Israel lobby in particular, they seem incapable of putting forward a message which just doesn't seem like flagrant conflicts of interest. So either that they're Jewish themselves or that they're clearly being propped up by this ethnic lobby. I mean, a good example, you mentioned the Daryl Cooper interview with Tucker Carlson, where he talked about World War II and the figure of Winston Churchill. And Konstantin Kisin was like going on for like this huge tirade on Twitter about like, oh, this is blasphemy. Churchill was a hero. He saved Britain. Oh, you need to hear the real history. But then like one thing I replied is like I just took the Churchill quote from his. I think it was the election in 1950, and he was proposing that the Tory party in Britain run on the slogan "Keep Britain White." He was basically proposing an ethnic nationalist position. Now, I mean, that's not necessarily the criticism of Churchill. The criticism is more just that he got Britain involved in this geopolitical conflict and fucked the country unnecessarily. But he was not a post-war liberal by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, if he were alive today, I mean, as many criticisms as we might have of him, he'd be a lot closer to the position of what's called today the far right than of anything in the center, even though he's become this like central figure of the post-war narrative. And then like another thing Konstantin Kisin came out and said was like, well, Britishness means believing in values like tolerance towards homosexuality and individualism. Well, again, that certainly wasn't the values of someone like Winston Churchill. I mean,
No.
he certainly didn't believe in that, and neither did anyone else in Britain before the I don't know, not even the 1940s, before the 1990s. It's just kind of outrageous that he'd come out and as a Jewish immigrant from Russia and like just define what it means to be of the country, which he's not even of. I mean, with Douglas Murray, he's even more unhinged. He comes out with these rants about how the light of Western civilization will be shut out forever if Israel were to fall. I mean, this is just it's laughable. I don't need to tell people listening why that's bullshit. But what strikes me with that is that it just doesn't come across as genuine. It just comes across as he is being paid to push this line, and the messaging as a result is just falling flat.
It just comes across as completely stale, and kind of out of date. It seems like it's from like 2007, and like what was that American radio?
Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah, it's like 2007, and Rush Limbaugh shouting all this stuff from a radio station in Texas or something. It's just totally sort of coded as being too old.
What I think you're seeing is kind of the political consensus of the past 80 years or so, kind of just falling apart. And in some ways, I don't want to be too celebratory of that because what you see on the left is it's not pretty. Like even if they're not quote unquote woke anymore, that doesn't mean that they're going to be your friends because they're clearly anti-white and they've made it clear that they want to just subjugate you. But I guess the positive on the right is that something genuine can actually break through from this. So like maybe we're seeing the shackles of the post-war narrative finally being removed, and that you can actually get on to a new political formula, and that's not just so bogged down that's
I
just
mean,
not so bogged down in the 20th century.
one of the things that frustrates me is that in a way, like the mainstream establishment right is so retarded that yeah, okay, they had this kind of superficial victory over woke, but then because their ideas are mainly garbage and bullshit and dishonest and grifting, that they've actually sort of reinvigorated the left because people will say, well, I don't care what happens in the Middle East, it's not my problem. Okay, but that doesn't mean that you can absolve yourself of other people caring. And so what's actually happened is that the establishment, right, who certainly do care, have found themselves sort of taking ownership of thousands of dead kids, and what many people are calling a genocide or ethnic cleansing or whatever you want to. Now, here's the problem: when the left were trying to trans the kids, it was just such a bad hill to die on. It was all this transing the kids stuff, all these arguments about how a young boy could identify as a girl. It was such a losing hand. But now you find actually they're coming back, and they've actually got something genuine to grab a hold of as a pile of dead people. The right's gifted them that through being retarded. The right just what they could have done is said, "Yeah, we don't like what's happening in Israel either. We're not going to support this," but they did. So now the left is becoming more and more energized. They are the ones who are anti-establishment. They are the ones who are now going to getting classed as terrorists. They are the ones who are fresh and sprightly, and it's the right who are in this kind of shitty position again.
All right, yeah. So I think definitely interesting times we're living in, and for me, I'm actually kind of more optimistic for the reasons I stated earlier. But because you do see that both sides, it seems like both sides of the aisle are in shambles, and whoever is in power seems to be the one flubbing it up. So when Biden was in office, it was the left who were the ones who were reviled. But now when Trump is in, and now that there's kind of been this revivalism of the populist right now, and now they're dropping the ball as well. And I think it just all boils down to the fact that the mainstream political consensus of the last several decades is just not tenable anymore. But I think we'll finish it there. So great to see you in person again.
Yeah,
And even though we talk all the time with classic movies,
yeah. I'm struggling as I've got a dry throat. Me, I've still got a cold, so I'm coughing quite a bit. Yeah, I've held up for like an hour, but my voice is giving out on us now.
well, I think we'll call it at that then. So thanks for listening.
All right, thanks, folks. See you later.
See you next time.